very excited that this is finally happening. I'm going to take a deep breath. Okay. Welcome, everyone, to the 4th Jewish Climate Action Conference. As you might know, JCAN started 10 years ago. One of the founders, Rabbi Katie Allen, is here today. I don't know if I saw her yet. And we're grateful to hear her perspectives later about the 10 years. You'll also be hearing from Fred Davis, who is her successor, who led JCAN before becoming the president of MCAN. And we're grateful for their previous leadership and their continued involvement.
Some of you have been with us since our founding. Some of you have only recently joined us. Some of you came only today for the conference, and we thank you. To all of you, thank you so much for making our work meaningful.
Before I get started, I think we should introduce ourselves.
Our pictures are up there. Who are we? Oh, we're supposed to say who we are. Oh, we cut that out of the script.
We did.
I'm Thea Iberal, the one with the mustache. This is
Debnam Crane, the one with the crazy eyes.
And this is?
And I'm Matt Liebman, and they are the two that did most of the work, by the way.
But we became the 3 co-presidents of JCAN after Fred stepped down to take over MCAN. So it took 3 of us
to replace one
Fred.
So our goal today is to sound an urgent and visionary Jewish voice on the crisis of climate change. Our Jewish values teach us to sustain the earth and to pursue justice. As Rabbi Allison Adler of Beverly recently said, and she's a member of our spiritual council, we are Shamrei Adamah, guardians of God's earth. Jewish wisdom warns us that if we are not careful, we could destroy the world through harmful or misguided actions, or through inaction. So, like blowing the shofar, we are calling on people to wake up.
Wake up. Oh, I have to read that. To mobilize synagogues and other Jewish institutions to take action to decarbonize.
Wake up to develop and share resources among our colleagues to reduce the impacts of climate change. And most of all,
wake up to work together with other environmental and justice organizations to reduce the impacts of climate change. And that's why we are here today. Our theme this year is how can we work together? Because these are big goals and we can't do it alone and you can't do it alone.
Oh. As you can see from our list of co-sponsors, we have established relationships with many nonprofits, for-profits, statewide organizations, national organizations. They focus on decarbonizing, reducing waste, food waste, environmental justice, or education. Thank you to all of the sponsors who have helped co-sponsor this event this year, and thank you for everyone to agree to be present here today.
Today, you're going to hear from climate activists like Bill McKibben and Rabbi Arthur Waskow. And we are especially grateful that Rabbi Shoshana Friedman and the journalist and filmmaker David Abel are speaking today. But before we get to them, we're going to hear from
Rabbi Joel
Sissinwine. Yes.
He's been the rabbi of Temple Beth Elohim since 2000, and he's done a lot of wonderful things. We're just going to turn it over to say a few words.
I will be very brief, but I just want to thank you for being here and welcome you to Temple Beth Elohim. There was a little confusion about food and drink in the sanctuary, so just to share, in the Jewish tradition, very often the prayer space is a multi-purpose space because Jews have prayed in different places. It's really about 10 people more than the building itself. So it would become a study hall, it would become a banquet hall, and it would become a prayer space. But according to Jewish minhag and law, when you have a dedicated prayer space, one is not supposed to eat or drink. And this would be considered a dedicated prayer space because we have an ark and we have seating set up for worship with prayer books. So then the question is, why does it matter if it's designated or not? And I think it was really a mindfulness practice for the rabbis, which was to say that if you can ideally have designated places for things, focus on what you're there for. So if you have drink, food in here, don't worry about it. But I would encourage you in terms of a mindfulness practice, because you're probably not tasting the coffee or tasting the food when you're listening anyway. So just kind of put it aside and really focus, because you're doing holy work. And I want to acknowledge that. We're in the sanctuary, so we have the eternal light up there. And the eternal light, as many of you know, marks God's eternal love and presence. What's interesting is that it's fully dependent on human beings. It always has been. So imagine centuries ago, people needing to make sure it was lit and make sure there's enough oil and it was tended, and the light was there. And if it wasn't there, you had a problem. And yet we know that God's love is eternal and God's presence is eternal, but it was fully dependent on human beings. And so it is today. Our eternal light is solar powered. And we all know in this room that that takes work and commitment and dedication. And it would not happen without people like you keeping that flame lit and shining forth into the community, the Jewish community and the world abroad. So I just want to thank you for being here. Thrilled that we're able to host. And back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rabbi Zissenwein. Now I'd like to introduce Rabbi Josh Schreiber from Congregation Agudath Achim, I hope I pronounced that correctly, okay, in Taunton for our morning Devar.
Thank you. And thank you all. It's an honor to be here. I went looking for what the right text is to bring today to talk about, and of course, I found what I was looking for in the Torah portion of the week. In this week's Torah portion, there is a fascinating story about the tension between scarcity and overabundance, about the stewardship of natural resources, and about the importance of sharing the burden of leadership. We're in the book of Bamidbar, in the desert, and the people are, as ever, complaining. Once again, they're unhappy with the manna. The manna that falls like dew each evening, that tastes like rich cream and provides each person with what they need for their nourishment, no less, but also no more. The people are not satisfied with the manna. What they want is meat. So God sends them meat, an unimaginable quantity of quail that covers the ground around the camp a distance of a day's journey, 2 cubits deep. Not content to supplement their diet of manna with the occasional bit of quail for variety, the people set out to slaughter as much as they can, spreading the dead quail out around the camp. And from here, you don't have to think in terms of divine punishment to understand the inevitable outcome. All you need is a basic grasp of food safety to predict the plague that followed. Rabbis have many theories over the generation as to why the people were so dissatisfied with the manna. Today, I can't help but wonder if part of the problem for them might not have been the fact that there was no surplus. They couldn't stockpile it. They couldn't build wealth with it. No Israelite could find a competitive advantage to corner the market on manna. They lacked the ability to recognize the abundance of simply having enough. As Ben Zoma said in Pirkei Avot, Mihu Ashir Hasameach Bechelko. Who is wealthy? One who is satisfied with their portion. Instead, what they got was a plague and piles of rotting meat. While this is going on, there's a parallel narrative about Moses feeling overwhelmed by the enormity of the task of taking care of these people. Did I give birth to them, he asks? Am I supposed to nurse them? I believe Moses really wished he could, just as I'm sure most of us wish we could solve the overwhelming challenges of the climate crisis. God addresses Moses' overwhelm not by lifting his responsibility for the people, but by spreading the burden of the inspiration of prophecy. 70 wise people gather to prophesy with him, and 2 more, Eldad and Medad by name, spontaneously prophesy in the camp. You might think that Moses might take this as a threat to his power and his leadership, which is exactly how his protege Joshua takes it, telling them, Moses, put them in jail. But to Moses, this is a relief. Would that all God's people were prophets, he says. And I bet a lot of people in this room can relate. Would that all God's people were prophets today and could see the inevitable dangers of the climate crisis, could recognize the value of being happy with what we have, rather than pursuing wealth until it depletes our environment and comes out of our collective noses. And so, we gather here to lift each other's burden, to seek better ways to share in this challenge together. May we each come away from today with a bit more hope, knowing that there are other good people working on this project with us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was wonderful. Environmental justice is a priority in JCAN's work, and we're grateful that John Walke could join us to talk about that. Starting in 2017, he has led the Green Roots work in East Boston and along the Chelsea Creek. John worked for a decade in hazard risk assessment and mitigation and natural resource management in Central America and the Caribbean for NGOs, the U.S. government, and the United Nations. Welcome, John. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'm really honored to be here and to speak and to kick off the day of a great conference, which I think we're all going to get a lot out of. And I'm going to start my timer so I keep to my 30 minutes here. Next slide. And you can click it one more time. There's a little bit of animation here and there. As has been said, my name is John Walke. I'm the Director of Climate Justice and Waterfront Initiatives at Green Roots. And Green Roots is a community-based environmental justice organization. We've been around for 30 years in the city of Chelsea, and in the past 8 or 9 years or so, we've also been working in the neighborhood of East Boston, which is where my family's originally from, and I've been living the last 20 years. And I'm going to talk today a little bit about my organization, the environmental justice work we do, how we approach it, and then because environmental justice sometimes can be kind of a heavy topic, kind of a bummer, I want to end with energy democracy, which is a much more exciting and a really open space for us to do a lot of great work to address a lot of the bummers that are in environmental justice. So, next slide. And this graphic sort of illustrates what it means to us to be a community-based organization. So our board, our staff are all drawn from Chelsea and East Boston for the major part. Our board is entirely made up of residents. Everything we do is bilingually. We have interpreters at all our staff meetings and board meetings because we have some monolinguistic Spanish speakers and English speakers. And what we're doing is really connecting in with people to find out what are the concerns in their community and how do they want to address those. So we started out, if you wind back 30 years ago, you might remember, for those of you who've lived around here, Chelsea was really in dire straits. It was in receivership, it had a collapsing municipal government, and they were redoing the school system over. They had John Silber at BU doing that. And in order to build new schools, which were needed, they put them in the playgrounds and in the park space. And there were community members who were concerned about the loss of some of the precious few bits of park space that we had. And so we started out really as a park advocates group of just advocating for more green space. But as soon as we started doing this work, it became clear it wasn't about parks and trees, it was about the people that are using that and why they did not have as many parks and trees. So we began, as I said, with park advocacy, but quickly went into food justice. We maintain some community gardens, an urban farm, and a teaching kitchen. We have a youth program for many decades now. We've fought to get waterfront access to our industrial waterfront. Air pollution has been a huge thing for us in making the connection between air pollution and the health outcomes, the poor health outcomes that we have in our community. Advocating for better transit, and of course climate and energy. And Green Roots sort of serves, as that image is showing, as a bullhorn to really amplify the voices of the people, to engage them and educate them about what to do, what are the tools available for them, and then to empower them to implement the solutions that they want to see for their problems, not to have imposed upon them. Next slide. So the communities we're talking about: Chelsea, smallest municipality and most densely packed municipality in Massachusetts. And East Boston, this sort of separated from the rest of Boston neighborhood. Both of them very similar in size and demographics. East Boston's larger, but of that 5 square miles, 3 of it is taken up by the airport. So you've got 2 square miles in both cases and those figures in terms of the number of people, it's probably like 50 and 60,000. The little plus there means a lot of the folks in the neighborhood are what the census calls hard to count, meaning undocumented immigrants, people who have housing instability and move around a lot, so the numbers are a little bit low. Both of them are very diverse communities, and both have always been gateway communities. East Boston actually had the immigration center that was the Ellis Island, basically, for Boston. Very diverse communities of Italian and Jewish and all sorts of different immigrants, and today many of them Latino. So Chelsea, far more diverse. It has a large Somali population, Eritrean population, Ethiopian, folks from all over. The higher levels of poverty than the state generally has. The area median income for Greater Boston, Chelsea is down about, their median income is about 35% of the area's median income. And in East Boston, we've been the only majority Latino neighborhood in Boston, but that number is getting smaller and smaller. The poverty rate's going down, not because people are getting wealthier, but because wealthy people are moving in and pushing out the immigrant communities. Next slide. And I like this picture because it really illustrates the idea of the kind of industrial burden that we're living with. This picture is taken from over at the McClellan Highway on the Revere East Boston line, looking west across the Chelsea Creek. That's the water you see in the front. And those tanks there are Gulf oil tanks. And behind it, you can see a densely packed neighborhood of triple deckers. Off to the right is a little cupola of City Hall in Chelsea. And then in the west, on the border with Everett, are the smokestacks of the Everett Marine Terminal, big natural gas facility, and then the smokestacks of the Mystic Generating Station, which was until recently the largest fossil fuel burning power plant in New England. It's been decommissioned and now is going to become a soccer stadium. But you can see that the community is really surrounded by this industrial infrastructure that is for the benefit of the region. Next slide. And it's not just fuel that we are home to. Road salt that comes in by tanker from all around the world gets dumped in Chelsea in these 4-story tall piles that you'll see from the Tobin Bridge as you drive over. And that salt goes out to all the municipalities around Massachusetts and New England wide. Next. And in terms of produce, the New England Produce Center on the Chelsea-Everett border is the largest independent produce center on the eastern seaboard. They provide fresh fruits and vegetables from the maritime provinces all the way down to the mid-Atlantic states. 37,000 trucks going in and out of there annually. You can see the back ends of those trucks all have air conditioning units that are running 24/7, contributing to the air pollution in the community. Next slide. Click one more time. And you can see all those white dots are all oil tanks. And one more click. So traditionally, we've been home to over 70% of the region's gasoline and diesel, 80% of the home heating oil, and 100% of the jet fuel used at Logan Airport. The interesting thing to note here, a little digression, is on the far left, the far west, that's actually Everett, and that's the ExxonMobil facility. Well, ExxonMobil got out of the distribution world, and that property was actually worth more to them as real estate as things have been gentrifying. So that property has been sold. Almost all of those tanks are now gone. There's an energy battery storage facility going in there, as well as a bunch of housing development. On the far eastern side, you can see some blue tanks in that far yellow rectangle there. And that was Global Oil. They've sold off all of their tanks, and those tanks half of those tanks are gone, and they're putting in a logistics facility. And they actually, across the creek, that one right on the water there, that was Gulf Oil. Gulf Oil also sold out. Global just moved their facility, their oil, over into their property, at Gulf's former property. So you can see the oil companies see the writing on the wall, and they know their property is worth more as a developable piece of land than it is oil terminals. But the one thing that won't go away is that one down the bottom in East Boston, which is jet fuel, because I do not see us switching over to commercial air flight by solar power anytime soon. So that will be there if not expanding. Next slide. Regional highways. One more click. We have highways, bridges, 3 different tunnels. So all of this traffic goes through our communities to get to the airport, to get to Boston and points south and west, with an incredible number of daily trips going over us and contributing to the air pollution, the noise pollution, the loss of land space, and basically just a lower quality of life. And that's all for the benefit of others more so than us. Next slide. And of course, the airport, the largest polluter in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, the largest in Massachusetts, and the amount of pollution coming out of each flight that goes out is really incredible. It's like having, I heard it described by a researcher recently, it's like having a power plant taking off over your house every single hour, every 30 seconds they're going off. And it's a massive amount of emissions with a huge impact on the health of folks. It can't be understated, overstated, the health impacts. But then there's also the noise, there's also the traffic that goes to it, and the amount of land space and support that's taken up by the airport that could be used for things like parks. Next slide. And of course, outside of the environment, we have things, social burdens like, hey, a casino, why not? Just another thing to have in the neighborhood. Next. So environmental justice. This is my mother's question always. What the hell is it that you do? I don't understand. What is it that you do? And it really is something that it's been sort of a niche kind of thing. A lot of people just aren't really aware of it. It wasn't until actually the Biden-Trump debates that Biden had environmental justice come out of his mouth, and he was talking about fence line communities, and really the concepts of environmental justice were breaking into the mainstream, became much more in vogue. Next slide. So there's an activity we would do when we're doing presentations to the group where it'd have like a big butcher paper and we'd have an E on one side, J on the other. And I'd say, when I say environment, what's the first thing you think of? Trees. What else? Air, water. Okay, you can do a few clicks. So, yep, another one. Maybe another one. And one more click. There we go. And now when I say justice, what's the first thing that jumps to mind? Okay. So these were some of the things, and usually we're doing this was in Roxbury with kids, so their experience of justice was courts, the police, they knew about civil rights, and then the school to prison pipeline. And then they also said, like, the woman with the blindfold with the scales and stuff. And so when we look at these concepts, what we're really sort of dividing out in one click are, on one side, we have these things and systems. We have hydrologic cycles and ecological systems, and we're studying these things, feedback loops and whatnot, especially when we talk about climate. And click again. And on the justice side, we're really talking about people and the processes that we use to sort of interact, to guide the interactions among one another. What are the laws, the regulations? When you want to build a house or build a building or a power plant, what do you have to do to get that done? Not on the engineering side, but on the permitting side. And it's really the interaction of these processes with the systems and how it can affect that, and then the systems feedback and affect the people. That is really what environmental justice is about. Next slide. So when we say what is it, one of the things with our environmental friends that has been a long fight to get across, and one more click, is that it's not justice for the environment. That was frequently what was thought of. I've had volunteers from Sierra Club come in, want to speak to our youth about how important it is to save the polar bears. And we had to tell them, like, these youth are never going to see a polar bear because even our zoos here in Boston are just not all that great, so they don't have polar bears. They're not going to see them in the wild. They are just concerned with getting by, of not having an asthma attack because the air pollution is so bad in their neighborhoods. Next slide. So, and you can just keep clicking a couple here. So there really is a whole potpourri of types of justice that we work on. Housing justice, energy democracy, racial justice is at the core of the EJ movement. And then because we are such an immigrant community, especially in this moment that we're living in right now, immigration is a huge issue for us. Labor rights, issues around the LGBTQ community, all of these things are important components of the work we do. So as much as the environment and the life cycle of a tree is important to us, all these other social issues are important to us. And they all have one common theme running through them, is that the way the system is now is not working. Something is out of whack. And it is apparent in the health outcomes, in the climate change, and the environmental impacts that we're seeing. And it's basically that the status quo sucks. That the way things are done right now is not the way it should be done, and we're trying to change it. It is essentially a progressive movement. We need to progress from where we are. Next slide. So I don't want to go deep into the EJ movement, but to roll the clock back, you can sort of think in your mind, post-war period, trying to come to finally having a racial reckoning of dealing with segregation, of dealing with civil rights, culminating in 1964 in the Civil Rights Act. At the same time, there's a growing, burgeoning awareness of just what we were doing to the environment. When people's rivers go up in flames, when we start seeing a hole in the ozone, these things were becoming more and more known. And by 1970, you have Earth Day starts, you have the EPA founded, you have the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. Things were really starting to change. And then it was a merger of basically a human rights, civil rights movement really based in the African American community, linked in with the awareness of what we were doing to the environment, and realizing we weren't doing it to the environment in all places equally. And where we were doing it were predominantly black communities. And that's where the concept of environmental racism was first brought out in the late 70s, and in particular in this case in Warren County, where someone had a bunch of PCBs they wanted to get rid of. They put them in a tanker truck, one of those trucks that would spray water on the side of the road to keep the dust down. They sprayed it on the side of the roads all through a county that was a largely black county. The newly minted EPA said, you can't do that. That's not how we do it now. Scrape all that contaminated soil up and dispose of it properly. So they said, okay, we'll do it. And they did it. And they said, where do we dispose of it? Well, here's a great community. It's 86% or 84% African American, high poverty rate. We'll put the landfill there. And so began a battle against this environmental racism. And that really was one of the first cases where environmental justice became something that people were talking about in a court of law. It went on for years because the processes are not serving people, but they're serving sort of corporate interests. They lost that battle. The landfill got built. The landfill eventually did what people expected it to do, leak dioxin into the groundwater. And they finally closed it in 2003. And it's interesting to note that this case that started in 1978, the final lawsuits related to it wrapped up in the 2000 teens. So we are talking about a generational, a decadal sort of fight. So it's a real level of dedication on the part of these people, not only to lay down in the street, but to keep it up through generations of fighting this. Next slide. And then briefly, redlining is something that I think people have become more familiar with in recent years. This was and what we're looking at here, that's East Boston towards the bottom, in Chelsea. You can sort of see that little lobe sticking out. That's all Chelsea there. And redlining was a program of the federal government which was giving out loans post-war period and it was deciding basically where investment was going to go. And what they did was to assess different census blocks and to say whether or not these areas were worth investing in. And some of the characteristics had to do with the quality of the housing and the housing market, but mainly it had to do with who was living there. What was the ethnic breakdown and the racial identity of the people in that neighborhood? And on the basis of that, we would decide whether or not we'd give you a loan. Next slide. And a little hard to see in this, but one of the things that people love about the redlining thing is that it really is illustrative in the mapping of certain things. This policy left a thumbprint on the landscape of basically a thumbprint of prejudice, a thumbprint of disinvestment. And so you can see the red areas in the redlining map. Those are all from the 30s or so. And then as we go across to the tree canopy coverage, which is probably the easiest to pick out, is the areas that are in darker green where there's a fuller canopy are the areas that in the redlining you see there's no red lines in that area. So tree canopy, you plant a tree, you don't have much of a canopy. It's a twig at that point. A canopy takes decades of investment and maintenance and stewardship to actually have all the benefits that trees bring in an urban area. And what we're seeing here is the fact that the government had actually promoted disinvestment in certain areas, means that decades later, we have areas like East Boston and Chelsea, Chinatown, that have no trees whatsoever. And those are the areas now, if you go to the far right, where we have the worst heat island impacts. And of course, those heat island impacts have a direct relationship to health and poor health outcomes. So all of these things are related by not investing in something like trees, but also not investing in the housing stock. That is going to have an impact in the health outcomes coming out. Next slide. The other thing that I like to do, especially as a white person, middle class, college educated, I like to make myself feel bad. I like to make sure that we do not just sort of gloss over it and look at a map and move on and point a finger at the bad people, but that we actually look at this form. So this is the government. These forms all typed out. I'm sure some sort of secretary sat there and at a typewriter and put in all the data that went into this. So next slide will show sort of more detail. The language that they use in the form was infiltration of, and then you fill in the blank of what ethnic group was it. So it's not that this was the demographic makeup. No, you were infiltrated. I mean, infiltration, you think of either cockroaches or water in your basement or something you don't want. And so they would say foreign, they would say it was an infiltration of Jewish, an infiltration of Irish, Italian, Polish. Then there was never infiltration of English, but it was infiltration of these other undesirable groups. And then there was a whole category of Negro. What percentage of Negro do you have? It's just, it blows your mind thinking of it today. But of course, this was back in the 30s, totally, obviously you see the old movies, just a different set of standards, then we have to sort of accommodate for that. Next slide. Fast forward to 1984, here is the actual report from, extracted from consultants who were helping a company figure out in California where they should site a trash incinerator. And these were the characteristics they wrote down, they said the quiet part out loud. If you want to put this somewhere, where you're going to get the least resistance will be someplace where there's high school education or less, where it was low income, look for some Catholics, those are the places you could get this thing in. Most likely to resist, watch out for the yuppies and the housewives, for God's sakes, don't go there. They will fight. People who are college educated or middle upper income. So it's very clearly a classist, ethnocentric kind of criteria that are being used. Next slide. In 1991, so we're getting a little closer, another consulting firm did a dashboard survey of where they could site a nuclear waste dump in North Carolina once again. And they went through these communities and they saw some of them, the houses were fairly wealthy. It looked like an affluent neighborhood, so therefore those were off the table. But the areas that were residents of this, were minority owned, or it was a very depressed area, or there were trailers all over the place. Well, those are places where we think we can get this dump sited there. So again, it's the same sort of language, the quiet part sort of said out loud and documented. Next slide. So that sort of stuff is the bummer. That's the stuff you're like, good God, like how horrible. The exciting part is that those things are, the thing that made that so horrible were those processes, those policies and the practices we had in the market. And those are all things that are put in place by humans, therefore we can control them. And when we come into energy, we are at a moment in time where there's a great upheaval, a transition in our energy system. And obviously many of you are here because you want to see clean energy. You want to see us getting off of fossil fuel, extractive fuel usage, and onto something that's clean and sustainable. But more than just that, there's an opportunity to change the process by which we implement that stuff. And so that's why we don't say energy, I don't use at least the term energy justice, but energy democracy, because it's really about taking the control, wresting it out of the hands of corporations and utility companies and putting it in the hands of people so that they have control over it and can receive the benefits of it. Next slide. So yesterday's grid, I think you all sort of have a handle on how it works, but you have large sort of point sources of generation, power plants, hydroelectric dams, whatever. The electricity goes out in one direction. It's going out through transmission lines, the big high power wires, down to a local substation in your neighborhood, and then out through the smaller distribution network of the telephone poles or the below the sidewalk electrical lines to your house. And it's all in one direction. There's on the left-hand side, you have supply. On the right-hand side, you have demand. And ISO New England that runs our grid is just concerned with figuring out how much demand is coming. We'll just keep shoveling the supply at them, and here's the bill. And so that's sort of how our system has worked. And anytime you have supply and demand, and people don't want to talk about demand, just supply, you know you're getting screwed. So always keep a track on that. Next slide. So our new grid starts out fairly similarly. There's industrial grade generation, and some of that can be renewable and green, like offshore wind or big solar farms. But typically those, like power plants, are owned by large corporations because it takes a lot of capital to invest in that. But they're pumping out major high voltage electricity on transmission lines owned by companies. And those transmission lines get to a substation just like before. And then that's where things get interesting. Because at that point, you're going into a distribution network where there is the potential for people to have distributed generation in their neighborhoods. You can have solar panels on all your homes. You can have battery storage. You can be controlling the amount of demand that you put on the system so that at those moments when there's peak demand, you can crank back your electricity usage and let the grid know that so that they don't have to keep meeting this huge demand, but the supply can actually be lowered. So for ISO New England, who's just been shoveling all the energy off in one direction, they get ready to shovel and all of a sudden they've got energy coming back at them. And the grid you have to maintain in balance. It's like a tightrope. You've got to keep it the same sort of supply and demand on either side, like a balance sheet. And so they are now trying to figure out, when they get more electricity coming from the distribution network, how do we turn off what we have coming from our generation? We're going to be buying less, or we're going to be storing it into industrial battery storage. And that sort of back and forth provides an opportunity down in the distribution end for people to start taking ownership and for people to start receiving the benefits of the energy that they're able to freely produce from the sun. Next slide. So in Chelsea, we're implementing a microgrid. Actually, we go through this whole process of explaining what a microgrid is, and then we say, yeah, all that's actually not what we're doing. So one of the problems is, I think people get the idea of a microgrid. Just wire up a bunch of houses, you have a generator or some battery storage. If the main grid goes down, you can still keep going with islanded off, a little island of energy. We aren't allowed to do that in this country because the utility companies have franchise rights. You can't wire things up yourself. You can in some cases, like a university campus or like Longwood Medical Center, can sort of do things like that because they own all the property. But for the most part, those are exceptions. And that's where this process needs to change. A virtual microgrid is what we're implementing, where it's basically an accounting issue, where you have a lot of different people who are all sort of coordinated with battery storage and demand control and solar panels. And what they do is they keep track of the amount of energy they're able to contribute to the system or to pull down from use when peak moments. And what you do is you participate. You tell ISO New England, I can provide this amount of electricity at this point in time. which will help with the grid. And you account for that, and you have some sort of financial benefit coming from it. Next slide. So our goals is to have originally it was resilience. We've done a lot of work with the former mayor of San Juan in Puerto Rico. There's been a lot of interest in microgrid because the corporations there have mismanaged their grid so badly. We're looking at ways, if we're producing electricity, we can reduce the energy costs for building owners and tenants. And we really do want to model a management model that is based on democratic participation and people being engaged in it. And finally, this all provides an opportunity. Clearly, it's solar panels and energy efficiency and demand control, which is really expanding the use of clean energy and that issue of abundance, of just using less energy, just not keep consuming, but consuming wisely. And it's an opportunity for green jobs, because there's going to be a need for a lot of people to be working on this. Next slide. And actually, you can skip this one and the next one. One more. So in terms of implementing this microgrid, we're working in Chelsea with one model, and our staff is working with a partner agency, the Chinatown Community Land Trust in Boston's Chinatown, to implement a microgrid there, which is sort of based on a different model. So the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center has been funding us, and they're a really great quasi-state agency that really puts money into projects that are experimental, and they are really pushing the boundaries of what we can do. And so shout out to them. In Chelsea, what we're doing is a municipal model where we're engaging the community, and the way I usually describe it is, think of your local conservation commission. You have residents who sit on a board, and they're responsible for implementing the Wetlands Protection Act and things like that. They actually are representing the DEP in your municipality. What we are thinking of is like a municipal energy board where folks will be making the decisions, they'll be educated on the topic, and then helping to make the decisions on what will be invested in. What kinds of bonds will we take out to put in more solar panels on municipal buildings, as well as making arrangements with private property owners to be in agreements with them to put solar panels on their roofs. With that money that comes from this energy, it would be in a separate fund from the general fund, and this board would make the decisions as to where that money goes. Some of it will have to go to pay off the assets they've bought, but then when they start making a profit, we can expand more assets in the community, more battery storage or whatnot, or, and this is what we're really seeking, is use that money to offset the energy burden that the community has. Because right now, here's my warning. Right now, we pay very high, the percentage of people's budget that goes to energy is very high. So that would be the model that we're working on, is to bring some of that money back to the community. And in Chinatown, they're actually set up a B corporation and trying to work with private landowners, mainly affordable housing projects, to do something similar, but it doesn't involve the city so much as just partners who have agreements signed. And then I think almost done here. Next slide. Yes, this was just to make the point. Frequently, when I do these presentations, I go online and I Google pictures and I try to scam other people's graphics. And the thing I've always noticed when it comes to energy and clean energy graphics, they always have these subdivisions that look like something outside of Denver that was built last week. And all the houses are these nice energy efficient brand new houses with driveways and space for your car and stuff. Really bucolic sort of scenes with solar panels on the roof. My reality is that lower picture there of triple deckers, 100-year-old housing stock. The house leaks like a sieve. You know, its energy efficiency is not an issue there. It's got knob and tube wiring and a roof that's collapsing, all renters in it. And so trying to upgrade these houses to be that little idyllic picture is very expensive and very challenging. And the one thing we don't want to do in this is to be upgrading housing where there'll need to be a return on that investment immediately, which will result in raising rents, which will result in exacerbating the displacement of our community. So again, coming back to the process, we've got some systems and things that we can make work. How do we jigger the process so that we can make it work for the people and not for a corporation? I think it was one last slide to close us out. And this was something I did this was the question I posed to our regulators, to the Secretary of Energy and Environment and others, is really this regulatory system we've had has incentives in it that were set up like back in the early 20th century when we didn't have electricity everywhere. So we put these incentives to make the corporations put those wires out there. And now the question is this really getting in the way of many of our goals, whether it's decarbonization, equity, or making this stuff affordable, which has obviously become very much a hot topic right now. So I'm going to, now the last slide is, thank you. That's what And I don't know if we've got like 5 minutes before we run off to the next session. So if there were any questions or comments that I wanted to leave some time for anything that people had. Yes, back there. We've fought in Chelsea for a municipal aggregation program. We had a problem with the DPU up until just a short time ago, where they were sitting on top of their applications for years. We waited 4 years to get our municipal aggregation program approved. And in that time, we've had third-party suppliers, competitive suppliers, or we call them predatory suppliers, preying on our community, which has just upped the cost of energy. And so we view municipal aggregation as being a key component. And on your bill, if you have Eversource, it has that blue and the green bar. That's on the actual energy supply side, so we can lower that cost. It's the distribution part of your bill that can be so huge. Even when your blue bar of the actual supply is really low, you'll still have this huge green bar that you're paying for, and that's where, if you look under the hood, that's where a lot of the corporate profits are for Eversource and National Grid. And that's where we want to start taking some of those things out of their hands and put it into the hands of the community, and that would start lowering the bill. So we view municipal aggregation, community solar programs, things like that, are all another tool in the toolbox to bringing down the energy burden for the community and doing it in a way that can be also sustainable and green at the same time. Yes? It's sort of a little bit of everything. One of the things we've been talking about that we want to do, if we can get Mass CEC and maybe some charitable foundations to kick in the money, is to sort of take one block in the city and kind of do an Oprah Winfrey where you get a do-over, and just do every single house over and not care about, oh, are they means tested? Will they qualify? I don't care. We're doing this block over. But beforehand, monitor the hell out of it. Monitor how much energy they're using, what the air quality is, what the temperature is inside, outside. Do all of that on that block. And then do the things over. Take out the gas lines, put in conduction ovens, put in electric heat pumps, the whole works, and then keep monitoring it so that we get an idea of how much are we talking about. Because right now we don't even have a good estimate of what it would cost, and then what would be the benefits, not only in terms of the energy use, but in terms of the potential health benefits. Because we've done a lot of air quality monitoring, and one of the things even worse than the airplanes that's probably killing people is are their gas stoves. The air quality inside the houses just goes straight through the floor every time people start cooking. And that's where people spend a lot of time, is in the house. So we need to be addressing that issue as well. So if we can quantify the benefits, then we can actually make a case for the investment, which we will then have a better handle on exactly how much it is.
Thank you guys so much, and see you out there.